Good evening. Glad to see so many people here, and some that have probably been to Holy Faith um, infrequently, if not being the first time tonight. So we welcome all of you here tonight. Several months ago, a group of us got together uh, because of concerns that we had together as God's faithful people, seeing a lot of destructive, upsetting, uh, and potentially damaging changes going on in our world around us. I still feel like I was waylaid by the announcements early on in this part of the year about some of the social programs that were being run by some of my favorite organizations like Lutheran Social Services for Ministry, or Samaritas as it's called, and then the bishop or the Episcopal uh, social agencies as well, and that they were, in my opinion, kneecapped with a lot of cuts and a lot of charges that came from some of the highest leaders of our land. So anyway, some things have continued to happen, and we came together as a group that called ourselves uh, Voices for Justice. And so after uh, meetings and uh, meditations together, a book study that we did a couple weeks ago, uh, we decided to enlarge the uh, uh, the perspective and possibilities for engagement with others around from our own congregation, and trying to pass along word to other congregations as well. In that light, you're certainly welcome to take one of these uh, flyers. I think they're on a table there in the narthex that you're welcome to take and pass along to other people. What we have tonight is the second of our introductory three-part presentations. We'll see if it goes further than this later on in the fall and maybe into the early part of next calendar year. Uh, and tonight's focus is going to be on the civic engagement kinds of things that we can do on behalf of those that we see being hurt, some of those that are the most vulnerable in our society, in our world, and in ways that we can do together faithfully as God's people. By the way, I'm Barry Osterber. I'm a retired ELCA pastor who, along with my wife Elaine, has landed here. I know some of you know Pastor Andrea Martin, who is the pastor here at Holy Faith. Last week also, retired Pastor Stan Eckerman was part of the presentations as well. But tonight we have Professor Judith Kullberg and Miss Robin McCants. Most of us know them better as Judy and Robin because Judy and her husband Bob have been members here for a number of years, and we've got to know them both very well. Bob through his magnificent singing voice in the choir, Judy through her involvement in many ways, but her gardening abilities that have helped here as well. Judy will be our first presenter, and she's a retired, professor emerita of political science at Eastern Michigan. She did that in that role for about 21 years, and so has that perspective of engaging with that kind of educational environment along those lines. She also has a history of travel, and she's been to Russia a number of times in terms of the research and continuing educational things that she was involved with from the 1980s and on through the next several decades. So we're very glad to have Judy as our first presenter. Before we do that, however, I'll ask you to join with me in an opening prayer, shall we? Heavenly Father, we ask you to guide our discussion tonight, guide our hearts and ears and ways in which we can learn and grow together as your people in understanding of the world around us and in also understanding of the ways in which we might be challenged to help and assist and advocate in ways that are possibly new for us. We ask you to bless our speakers, Judy and Robin, and all that they can share with us to encourage us, to uh, enliven us, to help potentially to point us to ways in which we can serve your people so much better. All these things, Lord, we pray in your holy name. Amen. Judy?
Thank you for the introduction, Barry, and for the lovely prayer. I'm ready. Yes. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, Jim. So, Barry described to you how we began to meet as a group. And one of the reasons that we thought it would be important to have an education series, I'm hearing feedback. Okay. um, is because some people, remember our fellow parishioners, thought that there really isn't a place for talking about politics in a church, or the church isn't the place to talk about politics. And um, those of us, and especially me as a political scientist, um, for political scientists, everything is political, right? You can't really disconnect the political from anything. I mean, even the family or even basic interpersonal relationships have a political dimension. And uh, in fact, the politics of interpersonal relations is a pretty growing area in political science. So, but we thought, that would be a good place to kind of begin is to think about, well, what is the connection between Christian faith and our role as followers of Christ and our role as citizens in our country. So that's what I'm going to take on today. Oh, it's not moving. Okay. I think you did it. I think you might have done it. But okay. All right. Um, so one way of thinking about this is that as Christians, we're really citizens of two different realms of the kingdom of God and our country. And in that sense, we have dual citizenship. I don't know if you've ever thought of yourself as having dual citizenship. Some of you may have dual secular citizenship. Maybe you're a citizen of Canada, but we really have a kind of foot in both of those realms. And one thing we can ask ourselves is whether the citizenship in the two realms is completely separate or is it interconnected? And theologians have been exploring this question for centuries and providing different answers to it. So there isn't really just one answer to that question. There are more popular answers or more um, practiced answers, but many theologians have followed in the footsteps of St. Augustine, and his classic work was The City of God. And in that work, he said, well, there is this city of God and there's the city of man, and we really belong to Christ, to the kingdom of God. But we live in the world. We are mortal beings, and this is the world in which we inhabit. And we have to use our Christianity and apply it to the world that we live in, that we have existence in as material beings. Um, so a kind of question just to explore at the beginning, and we'll be coming back to it throughout this tonight, is how should our beliefs and values as Christians shape the actions and choices that we make as citizens of the United States? And then what is the connection, if any, between the Bible and the Constitution? Are those two documents related to one another, right? Because we profess to believe the truths in the Bible, um, but then we also adhere to the Constitution of the United States as citizens. Now, there are some faith traditions where there's really an attempt to kind of map the Bible onto our political life, to say that the United States is somehow the fulfillment of the kingdom of God. And that is, there are people even in the United States today who think that way. And the Lutheran Church and the Episcopal Church they don't see it in exactly that way. But there is a connection between the Bible and the way we live our lives as citizens in the United States. And we talked about that last week. So Pastor Barry and Pastor Andrea and Pastor Stan really explored the biblical foundations of our role as Christians in our society. So maybe we could kind of just start with that and connect what we're talking about tonight to last week. So, what does the Bible have to say to us? What is the information that we can glean from the scriptures about our role as members of society and citizens in the political order? And I think, I mean, our dominant theme as a group is justice, right? We could start there with justice. Pastor, you don't get to answer. I'm sorry. Well, even if you weren't here, you could certainly, yeah, take a shot at it. Would you like to answer? Yeah. No. Okay. Okay. Okay, Stan. Well, Stan also spoke last week. I don't know. We get the people that. Okay.
Oh, that's right. We have people at home. The folks in Minnesota may not be. There's so many trees in the way. Um, I think first you just a simple love your neighbor as yourself.
Okay. All right.
What Jesus said. We have Amos talks about justice.
Mm-hmm.
You can go on and on from there. That definitely makes a connection, a biblical connection for our lives.
Okay. Anyone else? So in the Old Testament, there are repeated references to justice, seeking justice, making sure that there is justice um, in the world around us. And who especially should we be concerned about being given justice? Yeah, the people who are the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized, the outsiders, the strangers, the orphans, widows, people who are um, disadvantaged and vulnerable. So they're the ones that we're primarily commanded to provide justice for, and to ensure that they are brought into the community and treated as equals with all believers. And then the message becomes so much clearer in the New Testament with the command to love one another, to love our neighbors as ourselves, to do unto others as we would have them do unto us. And then, as Pastor Andrea really described, if you look through the totality of the New Testament, there's this vision that we are to really try to bring about the kingdom of God on earth. That we are to have this community of believers where sins are forgiven, where the sick are healed, the community is restored, there's no animosity and conflict between us, and we are really pursuing the good of all. So the scriptures then have implications for how we live our political lives. So we can't it's not going to tell us how to be citizens in the United States of America, which is a very particular country, but it does have some general guidelines for how we proceed. So what I'm going to be doing is kind of linking this kind of Christian teachings with my discipline of political science. So I'm going to look at the various types of political participation in the United States. So what participation is different in every society. There are no two countries on this planet that have exactly the same forms of participation that are understood to be legitimate forms of participation. And then we'll look at kind of the impediments to participation, how participation benefits the society and benefits the individuals that engage in it, and then the possible pitfalls of political participation. And then we can think about how Christians as citizens can help to bridge this current partisan divide that we're experiencing in our nation. How can we defend human rights and strengthen democracy? So I've never given a lecture like this before, I have to tell you, because teaching a secular university, you don't talk about Christianity except, as an example maybe, and then you would have to balance it with another faith tradition to make sure that, we talk about many faith traditions. Oh, I'm going in the wrong direction now. Okay. All right. So, what political participation is all the actions that private citizens take to seek to influence or to support government and politics. And in general, scholars categorize political participation into two big categories. And the first of those is what we'd call conventional forms of political participation. And these are conventional in that we see that they're anticipated in the Constitution, specifically allowed for in the Constitution. The whole system of government depends on them. They're really integral to the political process. So they're conventional in that way. They're accepted, they're supported by the government. Number one in a representative democracy is voting. And related to it, campaign and electoral activity. Also, involvement in political parties. Political parties weren't foreseen by the founding fathers, so they're not mentioned in the Constitution, but they were created shortly after the American nation was established, after the Constitution was ratified. Communicating with government officials is alluded to in the Constitution, joining civic associations, and then, of course, running for or serving in public office. And if we kind of look at these different forms of conventional political participation, we can see that some are pretty easy. I'm getting away from the microphone. Some are pretty easy. They're low cost, while others require a lot more effort and expenditure of resources. So voting is the simplest form of political participation. But some of you may say, well, it's not that simple, right? In the US, it isn't really that simple. You have to register to vote. The time to vote, well, until mail-in ballots, until absentee ballots became widespread in usage, there was a pretty limited window of time in which you could vote, and it's always on a Tuesday in most for the general elections and national elections for sure. And campaign and electoral activity, it can be simple and low cost, or it can involve tremendous amounts of resources, as we're seeing in a lot of elections that occur in the United States now, which spend millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in the case of the presidential election. Then we have, I call them less conventional forms of political participation, because some of these aren't so different than the others. So participating in public opinion polls, that's actually pretty important, because a lot of how elected officials understand where the public is through the use of polls. So even though maybe only 1,600 people will represent the entire population of the United States in a poll, if the poll is done well, it can be an accurate representation of what the general public really thinks on a wide range of issues. We can also communicate our political views in the traditional media, letters to the editor, or on social media. And then social media and the internet have opened all kinds of new forms of activism that we may or may participate in or maybe not even know about. So there are a lot of young people, as an example, who have video blogs or vlogs, they're called, where they post every day on political issues. And some young people have, and some older people as well, have millions of followers who listen to what they have to say. And those of us who aren't online and don't watch that are completely oblivious to it, but it's become a very important form of participation and way that people learn about politics and are influenced in their political views. We can petition government. And then the real, oh, okay, okay. I'm still hearing a kind of feedback though. I hope it's not bothering all of you. Maybe it's bothering me more. The through unconventional forms of political participation are protests and demonstrations, marches, boycotts, strikes, civil disobedience. And all of these really are a form of what we would call oppositional activity. So when people engage in those kinds of behaviors, the message that they're conveying is very clear, which is we don't like something that's happening. We really don't like what's happening. This is so upsetting to us that we have to go out on the street and tell you that we are upset about what you're doing as a way of getting attention. And some of these behaviors can even cross the line between going beyond what's considered to be legal behavior or licit behavior. So boycotts and strikes may actually be forbidden by law. And civil disobedience, the whole point of it is to really break the law, usually in a peaceful way, to prove a point or to not to prove a point, to convey a message to elected officials. So in political science, there's a huge literature on political participation. I only have a little bit of time to talk about it. So I'm going to try to sum up like what I think to be the most important points about what we've learned from research. And the first is that voting is essential for representative democracy, but it is really weak as a form of political communication. It often does not communicate a citizen's true preferences. And why would that be? So how many times do you leave the polling booth and say, well, I voted for that candidate, but did I really make the right choice? Where you don't entirely feel positive about what you've done, or you voted for a ballot measure, uh, some kind of referendum, and you still have kind of mixed feelings about the choice that you've made. Have any of you experienced that? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of people shaking their heads yes. Okay, so why? Why does it leave you dissatisfied or wondering whether you made the right choice? Suzanne? Okay, all right.
Sometimes I'm not happy because I feel like I'm voting for the lesser of the two evils.
So that you didn't really like the choices that you had. You would have preferred to have different choices, but those are the ones that you're given.
I
Okay,
also think
Elaine?
that sometimes I don't believe that they're going to do what they say they're going to do. And so the result of, I may vote for someone because he says or she that she's going to do A, B, and C, and I don't see that happening.
Okay, so there's this huge problem with accountability. How do we hold the people that we've elected accountable to our vote? Really, the answer is that we don't get to hold them accountable until the next election. So we choose them for 2 years or 4 years to serve in government, and they get kind of carte blanche during that time period to make decisions that maybe we didn't want. Okay, what else is the problem with voting for like one candidate to represent you as a citizen? Picking one person to represent you. Yes.
The thing I was going to say is I think sometimes the voices I might want to be lifted up and get to vote for aren't on the ballot.
Okay.
The money that puts that person on the ballot keeps the people without money not on the ballot, or without that big following or whatever it is that we're voting for. Same with the proposals. The more
Okay.
exposure makes the difference of what's available to vote for.
Yeah, so money really permeates our political process, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. Yes.
There'll be so many constituents that one person has to represent, and how do you do that? How are you equal, fair for everyone that is in your constituency? It's tough.
Okay. Yeah. So when we vote for a single individual, many times that person hasn't clearly taken a stand on the issues that are of concern to us. We're guessing whether they're close to us on that. They may be far apart from us on some issues and close on others. And we're kind of making an estimate about whether they're going to do a good job of representing us. And in some cases, you'll vote for someone that you know for sure you don't agree with on probably 8 or 9 issues, right? But maybe the one issue you really care about, you select that person for. And you're going to be disappointed about all the others. And so you're not really very surprised then. You feel kind of let down later when you see that they're not voting the way you would want them to. But so the process is inherently limited in a number of ways. And one of the reasons for this is what political scientists refer to as electoral rules of the game. Every electoral system in a representative democracy has its own unique features and characteristics. And I, again, could lecture all night about this, but the US is a two-party system. It was really set up in a way that guarantees two parties, only two parties. And that's not a big range of views, right? As we're finding out with the two parties that we have. There are alternatives. There's proportional representation, which many European countries have, where there might be 7 or 8 parties. And so then voters have a wide range of views to choose from. And they know what those parties exactly stand for. And the parties make sure that their candidates adhere to those exact positions. They don't depart from them. The American political parties have very little discipline historically over their candidates. There have been times where that's not as true as other times. The Republican Party right now is very disciplined, but that is a historical anomaly. It has not historically been that disciplined. So rules of the game can change things. So in general, then, the literature on American politics has really said that it's the other forms of conventional and non-conventional participation that allow for more direct expression of citizens' positions, because they give the means to citizens to really focus on the issues that are relevant to them, what really matters to them, or the word that we use in political science is salient, the issues that are salient to them. And these forms of participation are essential because over the long run, if there's a very high level of participation within the citizenry, they assure that government is more responsive. This is very important. So what we also know about participation is that not all citizens participate equally. There's huge gaps in level of participation in the political process, and whose voices get heard. And what would you think are some of the factors? I give it away on the second point here, but why do some people participate more and some people participate less? Okay, some of it's personality. There's actually a big literature on this. I mean, there are some people who just love politics, and other people are just like, no, not for me. What else? Yeah, Molly. Money. Okay, money. So having resources makes participation a lot easier and a lot more effective, for sure. So in general, we know that socioeconomic status, where you are in the social hierarchy in terms of the prestige of your job, the income that you earn, um, the um, the prestige of the community you live in, et cetera, that that is highly correlated with participation. So the higher your socioeconomic status, the more likely you are to participate. So what are the implications of that for our democracy? Who is not participating very much? Yeah, anyone that is struggling with daily life is not likely to participate. So it's the poor, it's less educated, it's rural voters, it's inner city voters. There are large groups of people in the United States who never vote. And even if they vote occasionally, they're not well informed. They don't know how to communicate to their elected officials, and the elected officials don't pay very much attention to them. So for us as Christians, this is highly problematic. If we think back to what we know from the scriptures about what we should be doing in our society. So it's something to think about in terms of how can we improve participation. And then if we kind of move around away from the big picture about participation, we can see that your personal influence or influence as an individual has very much to do with being well informed, joining with others who are like minded, so not going it alone, um, maintaining a consistent level of activity for a prolonged period of time. So, not just like jumping in and out of politics, but like sticking with it for the long run. There's an issue that you're interested in, you become the expert on it. You develop the ties with political officials, with other people who care about that issue, and over time you can really make a difference. And then money, of course, is very, very important, especially in the American political system, given that we have very few constraints on how money is used in election. Okay, so what is the big problem for us today, as I see it, as Christians, and not just for Christians, but like for all Americans? Our political system is highly polarized. That's not a newsflash. You all already know that. So participation is essential for a healthy democracy, but what if the level of social and political polarization is very high? So in that context, there is such extreme pressure on individual citizens to take sides and align with one camp or another that very few of us are able to resist that. There's huge social pressure to pick a side and to not be neutral. And that's what polarization is. And we are seeing that right now. And it's not a recent development, but it's become much worse in the recent years. So if we look here, we can see the political polarization. These are the kinds of votes that we see coming out of Congress, where the members of Congress are voting almost completely on party line on issues. You see very little movement across the aisle, as they like to say. And then what does that lead to? Where interpersonal relations are fractured. We can't even talk with our friends and family members about politics. It's a terrible situation. And this kind of us them thinking is dangerous to our democracy and to our society, and it's contrary to the gospel. So what can we do? So I've been pondering this for a long time, and I've just recently read a book, and I recommend it to all of you, and maybe it'll be our next group read for our Voices for Justice. It's a book called Faithful Politics, written by a theology professor at Indiana Wesleyan. Her name is Miranda Zapor-Cruz. And it's just a beautiful read. It's really extremely well written, thoughtful. But she has the solution. She calls it salty politics, that we should practice salty politics. And she builds this idea of salty politics from Matthew 5:13, when Jesus said to the disciples, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot." So, how this passage has been interpreted by theologians is that followers of Christ are the salt, which means that we bring flavor, the flavor of love and compassion and forgiveness to the world. That's what we bring to the world. That's the salt. But salt in the ancient world was also a preservative. It's not used so much for that today, except for like beef jerky and stuff that I hope most of you don't eat very often. But Jesus, when he was telling the followers that they were the salt of the world, he was saying that they have this like preservative character. They kind of keep the society, the spiritual fabric of society together, the morality of society together. So believers should maintain their spiritual distinctiveness and not lose that saltiness. And what it means to lose the saltiness is to give in to social pressure and become just like the rest of society, just as bad as everyone else, all the bad qualities in human beings, or the typical, I should say, typical qualities of human beings that are not Christian. So what Cruz does with this is she says that as citizens, we can bring that salt to politics, that saltiness, and we can positively shape political outcomes by using the guidelines of the scriptures. We need to pursue the good of all rather than our own self-interest. And unfortunately, in our political life, we're often told to vote our economic interests, vote your pocketbook, right? You've heard that phrase. No, that's not what we should do. We shouldn't be thinking about ourselves at all. We should be thinking about the goodwill of everyone. We, in fact, as Christians, we should prioritize the interests of those who are the most different from us, not the ones that are the most similar, and the ones that are the most vulnerable in society. We need to adopt a critical stance toward political parties and political leaders and evaluate them according to Christian principles to hold them to account. And, oh no, is that my phone? No, it's not. Someone else's phone. It's the same ringtone that I have when um, and we have to remember that our primary loyalty is to Christ. So our primary citizenship, if you want to think of it that way, is in the kingdom of God. That's where our primary citizenship is. Yes.
The divide is among Christians. That's what I firmly believe because it's in my own family.
Yes, and
They'll quote the Bible this way, and I understand it that way, and that's the biggest divide. I think that's what hurts us the most.
there's a lot of truth to that. So we can talk more about that. And I see the same thing in my family too. So let me just kind of finish what this is, the saltiness, and then I'll pause. And James, you have a question. So if we're going to hold people to account, even if we tend to vote Democratic or we vote Republican, we can't like really identify with those parties. We need to stand back from them. We need to be critical of them. We need to think critically about them. And we need to be able to really know what the facts are and not be lied to, essentially, not fall victim to propaganda. We have to refuse to ostracize or demonize those who don't agree with us on political and social issues. And we need to participate as much as possible. And needless to say, we should never acknowledge or think that violence is any kind of a solution in any way. So has this happened before in American history that we had salty politics? Yes. So when Christians organized and were the basis for mass social movements, big changes occurred in the nature of our society. We could look back on these and think about, well, was that a good thing or was that a bad thing? But nevertheless, Christian beliefs were at the foundation of big social movements. The abolitionist movement, the temperance movement, there was the social gospel that we read about in the John Lewis biography that inspired the reforms of the progressive era, the civil rights movement, and I put the pro-life movement in here too, because that really is a Christian movement, and some of us may not agree with everything of the pro-life movement, but I believe most of the people who are in that movement are genuine believers, and so we should not just dismiss them, but actually have conversations with them about their views. So where does this leave us? And this is where I'll just kind of end on with a lot of questions. So political scientists for really the last probably quarter of a century have been saying that American politics is getting more polarized. This actually began in the 1990s. There's increasing political violence, which we're experiencing this year especially, an erosion of democratic norms and institutions in the United States at both the elite and the mass public level. So if you do public opinion polls of people, you see that people are losing faith in democracy. And there's no doubt that our country is sliding into authoritarianism. Some people are arguing we've already slid quite far this year. So can we be salty? Can we imagine a pro-democracy social movement that would seek to protect the rights and advance the well-being of all? And what would it look like? And what might we call it? So, okay. I'm sorry I
So
went on
can
so
I
long,
can I
Robin.
just
Yes, go ahead,
get in
James.
there real quick?
Sure.
So I mean, I think for the saltiness, one of the things, you said, but it's Christians on all sides. Well, it's Christians in name. And I think that one of the things that I take from this is I have to actually forget about the names. I have to forget about whether you're a Republican. I have to forget about whether you're a Democrat. I have to forget about whether you call yourself a Christian. And I have to focus on what do I think the message of Jesus was. And it was to love your neighbor. And it was to uphold the downtrodden. And it was
Right.
to not vote for your economic interests. And
Right.
the conversations that I want, like I want to have a conversation with people that says, so tell me what in the current policy of this administration is grounded in the teachings of Jesus. I can have that conversation. If I have a conversation about that man, it won't go anywhere. I don't know that the other conversation will go anywhere, but it's what increasingly I think has to guide my beliefs and not let labels be the thing that says this is where the polarization happens. Polarization around morals, differences in morals is the essence of progress in society. Hold on to that. And don't
Mhm.
demonize, but if somebody says, no, kill the poor, kill the homeless, that's a moral issue. And that has to be resisted.
Yeah. So I'm not saying we don't resist, but
No,
yeah.
I know. But
Okay.
for me, it's like, I think, because I'm trying to find places of hope right now, trying to abandon labels and just focus on what are the policies and the teachings maybe helps.
Hmm. I think so. So one example of how, for me, thinking about the salty politics, because a few people have said to me, um, okay, you guys are going to these protests in Saline, right? So for those of you who aren't members of our church, and we've been participating in the No Kings protests, the Good Trouble Lives On protests, because we feel like we have to defend our democracy. But when we go to those protests, not everyone is holding signs that say this, right? There are people holding signs that say some pretty terrible things and are implicitly calling for violence, if not actively calling for violence. And I think, given everything that's happened in the last week, I think that is problematic for us, right? And we have to figure that out. And I'm not sure what the answer is at this point. I mean, we can't control what everybody does in a protest, right? You've got lots of people with lots of views, but to be standing next to someone who's wishing the death of the president while I'm holding a sign that says this is a problem. So that's my view right now, but I think it is a problem. So, all right, we'll come back to more questions later, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Judy. Turning to our next presenter, Robin McCants. I've known Robin for many years. I guess we were first involved more closely together when I became active as the candidacy director for the Southeast Michigan Synod. And Robin was a director having some responsibilities for urban ministries, Acts in Common, I think it was called at the time, for those churches involved in the city of Detroit. So had a high regard for her and her participation in those kinds of things. I learned however, that he, when she was younger, often tuned into WrestleMania and those kinds of activities. So I'm going to have to reevaluate my my view of her. One of the neat things that happened on a retreat a couple of years ago, Robin and I had time to talk a little bit together, and we had a common intersection with a pastor. Uh, Don Luther was his name, and your first Lutheran pastor. And Don was the pastor of a congregation in Columbus, Ohio, where I was going to seminary. And both Elaine and I got involved with Pastor Luther's congregation there. So we had kind of some shared connections in that bit of history. Currently, Robin is the assistant to the bishop, Bishop Don Chris, for advocacy and urban ministry. And that may be evolving more towards lay ministry and justice concerns as time goes on. But maybe she can help delineate that a little bit more. So please welcome Robin McCants.
Thank you. So, um, a little bit more about me. Well, thanks for the invitation, first of all, to be here tonight. I was just coming off of a month away from work, and Judy was one of the first people who rang my email asking me to be present for this very important series that y'all are doing. So I could not say no because I'm impressed that y'all are being so intentional about this work. So thank you for doing this, and thank you for being here, and thank you for the invitation, Pastor and Pastor and Pastor. So a little bit more about me, though. I've been on Senate staff about 21 years. I didn't try to be there 21 years, but that's the way God would have it. But prior to my coming to the Southeast Michigan Senate, I worked for a few years at a foundation, and then for almost as long as I'm here, I was at a huge nonprofit in the city of Detroit, which really shaped me and my work, and I didn't know the path that I would be on. I worked for an organization called New Detroit, and it was created to bring civic, business, and community leaders together to talk about some of the ills and unequal treatment of people of color, Black folks in particular, with those who had access to power and the money, the white business community. And so that's who raised me into this work. So everything that I've done since then has just been a progressive along the same path of being a part of community development and fighting for the people, for people's rights, for those who may be considered on the fringes, on the edges, or those who just needed to be heard. So from that, I was very active in my home congregation as well at Genesis Lutheran Church. Um, and I say all that because I've met so many people throughout my career, throughout my life, who have just cared about other folks. And I don't know how to be other than that. So when I meet people who, as we're talking about politics, and I'm meeting people who say that they vote for their own self-interest, especially when I meet people of color who say that they do that, it takes me to some places. And then I try to explain why I feel so differently about how they feel. Sometimes it gives them some pause, and sometimes not, but that's where I'm from, and that's what I continue to do. So, what is issue advocacy, and does it work? Well, it used to. I don't know if it works now anyway, but we'll see what we can come up with here. So, Is it a down or an up? Okay. Okay. Whoop. Okay. Yep. So I know you all know you've had these fine pastors lead you in some of the justice related scripture. Matthew 5:6. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Micah 6:8. To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. Isaiah 1:17. Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, and please the widow's cause. Proverbs 18:5. Favoring the wicked isn't good. It denies justice to the righteous. And Matthew 25:40. And the king will answer them. Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these, brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me. So that's kind of what guides the work that I do. And we've heard about the separation of church and state. And then the First Amendment that says it prevents Congress from creating or establishing a religion and thereby prevents the power of the government from expanding beyond civil matters. Well, those things are changing rapidly. So I don't know what that means right now. And that's something that we all need to ponder and see where we are being called to serve. I know for myself, it's a challenge, it's a huge concern, and I don't know what to do. But I don't know what to do about that. I just know what God is telling me to do as a person of faith to continue to address the needs of those. I mean, we all have different kinds of privileges. Address the needs of those who have less privilege than I. So when we talk about keeping politics out of the church, I say, why? Why would we do that? I have heard clergy people say that. I've heard lay folks say it. I've heard people in the pews say it. And I don't know how we can read the gospel and not have politics in church because Jesus was kind of political. He was doing some stuff in the sanctuary, He was hanging out with people that the high and mighty would not be seen with. He was doing the dance of stepping outside of the boundaries. He was pissing people off. And I think that's what we should be doing. Through the preaching and Bible study, we discover the ways that Jesus did those interactions and the people that he interacted with, the places that he went and others wouldn't go. That's where we're supposed to go. I remember years ago, after a long meeting, I was with one of our pastors and she was in a collar and we were on at a church on the west side and she was like, well, let's go get something to eat. So I took her to a bar. I was like, you going to keep your collar on? She was like, of course I am. I was like, I didn't know what to do with that. But I've learned that you have to be who you are so that people can see who you are and trust that what you're saying, you're not separating yourself from them. You're a part of them. And I appreciated that lesson that I learned from her because we are called to be both aware and helpful to those who are not like us, whose needs are greater than ours. Jesus demonstrated the ways we are to care for the least of these. The EOCA says that we believe God is calling us into the world to serve together. Through our direct service, we aid immediate needs before us, and through our advocacy work, we impact systematic, long-lasting change. Well, what does that mean to us in our congregations and communities, and in particular individually? Now, the traditional Black church, Pastor Luther was my first Lutheran church. My mother and father went to different Baptist churches. And My mother met the Pastor Luther in the hospital, and her Baptist pastor didn't come visit her, so we ended up at the Lutheran church. And my father continued to go to his Baptist church. And in the traditional Baptist church, that's where you found out what was going on. We know through the civil rights movement, the church was the organizer. That's where the news was shared, the plans were made in the black church. So before we had internet and social media, that's how the concerns were identified. Whether they were good or bad, that's where the rallying happened. That's where the allies met. And without that black church, of course, there would be no Civil Rights Act and Voting Acts, which were signed with Dr. King by the side of President Lyndon Johnson. And there would be no John Lewis without all of the things that happened through the black church. There is no question that the black church is the parent of both the civil rights movement and today's Black Lives Matter. All of that happened through the activity of the church. As we think about how we care with one another through advocacy, public policies are what our officials write, amend, and ultimately adopt about the ongoing effects of our neighbors who struggle with hunger, live in poverty, and as well as God's creation, our earth. By telling by telling our lawmakers how our Lutheran ministries help the world and urging lawmakers to help them advance legislation that reflects these commitments, we're helping to create opportunities to overcome poverty and promote peace and dignity and to defend God's creation. Nick Bates, director of the Hunger Network in Ohio, says, advocacy ministry is a ministry of relationships. Legislative leaders are extremely busy during budget times, but by forming relationships with representatives before that budget drops and following up regularly, being a trusted messenger, you can break through the noise. He says advocacy efforts should break down issues into bite-sized pieces that are easy to understand. We remember the value of our witness is not in repeating the economic research, but in connecting that research through our communities in stories. We are the experts of our stories. Prior to the pandemic, I regularly attended ecumenical advocacy days in Washington, D.C. I don't know if any of you all have done that before or have been a part of it, but it was a huge gathering. We shared information, we shared stories. I remember one in particular was around immigration. I knew people were coming through South America and Mexico into the United States, and I knew it was happening, but the story of why it was happening caught my attention. And if you put yourself in someone else's shoes, then you can have more empathy about it. Why would I drag my children thousands of miles? No car, no bus, just walking, no promise of food or shelter. What would make me leave my home through all of that, all the danger, the who knows what's happening on the way? I'm sure there were folks being raped, murdered, beaten, things stolen from them. Why would I put myself and my family through all of that to get away from where I was to attempt to come into a different place? That's what caught my attention. And if we don't have laws that protect the people who are clearly fleeing, then who are we as a country? Who are we as a people? So during ecumenical advocacy days, we hear the stories, we see the data, and then we are given an ask. You go to your elected official from your state and you talk about what you know, what's going on in your own community, and ask them what they're going to do about it. This is how I feel. I'm one of a representative of my community. You're serving me. But it doesn't stop there. You also have to stay connected with those officials. They need to know who you are. Because if they don't know who you are, they won't show up for you. So if we are not spending time getting to know who the folks are who supposedly represent us, then yeah, they'll do whatever they want to do until it's election time again. There is no shortage of issues for us to support. And with the state of today's governmental policies, it's easy to develop justice fatigue. I felt that several times over the past 6, 7, 8 years. You just get so tired of the constant bombardment of tearing things down. The things that I support are not what most of our country support, is not what most of my community support. And it's overwhelming when it happens at all levels of government, local, state, and federal. So my ask of you, as you are thinking of ways to figure out how to do your advocacy, is to stay informed, to do those legislative visits, know who your lawmakers are, not only yours, but who are the lawmakers who oppose what you're about? Who controls the budgets and the money of the issues that we are concerned with as people of faith? And follow up. So, something that I've wanted to do for a while is actually study some of the ELCA social statements. The church, our church, has done a lot of work, and you'd be surprised how valid some of these old statements are. It's it's stuff that seems like it just continues to repeat itself. But when we talk about faith and politics, we have positions in these social statements that help us to state the case of why we do what we do, why we spend the time talking about the state of our country in church. The 1991 social statement of the ELCA Church and Society says, because the gospel of Jesus Christ liberates us from sin, death, and evil, the church as the body of Christ is free to love the neighbor, from Matthew 22:36. The call of God motivates the church to address society. The church confesses and teaches both law and gospel as the living word of the triune God. And as ELCA Lutherans and Christians, we are called to help our neighbors. Lutherans understand that the church is not in the world, but is in the world and not from the world. All of us, as baptized people of the church, through our faith, take part in the healing activity of God and Jesus. And at the same time, it's the fulfillment of all of creation. So it doesn't matter who you are, we have responsibility for one another. We have responsibility for the place that God has given us to care for. Now, one of my stories is the first action that I did as a member of Genesis. As I was, well into my 20s or 30s, working, taking care of myself, doing my thing, driving my car to church. We had for years a very strong summer program, 6 week summer program, kids on the waiting list. Then we started to notice we have a waiting list, and every year the kids were different. So one of my first actions, as I became familiar with a community organizing group called Moses, walk the neighborhood. I've been driving to and from church for a while. I saw what was passing by in my car with the windows up or down, but I didn't know the neighbors in that neighborhood anymore. So we did this community walk and just say, hey, we're from the church down the street. We don't live here anymore. Tell us what's going on. And one of the first folks that I spoke to said, we've had a gas leak in the street for months and we can't get anybody to come and fix it. Well, we're a big old church with a lot of people who vote. So we called our representative. They called DTE, and within a week, that gas leak was plugged. But because we were driving, we didn't know. We didn't smell it. We were going too fast. But the folks who lived right around there smelled it all the time. So we were able to do as a faith-based group what the residents were unable to do, and that was get some action. What's our Senate doing? I've listed a bunch of things here that some of the folks in our Senate are actively working on. We have the biblical of how we are supposed to treat our neighbors. We hear the news, we know the sound bites, we know about the rapid succession against the brown, black, gay, elderly, refugees, immigrants, children, against our neighbors, the homeless. But just like you, there are members and congregations around our Senate who've taken up some of these issues. John Hartig in the Downriver area is a strong proponent of climate change and has done a number of workshops and videos around protecting our waterways. Um, the mental health and well-being, Pastor Kate Zawicki from Transfiguration Lutheran Church in Fenton has been trained in suicide, understanding the causes of suicide and helping families walk through that process. I believe because of a young person in her congregation who died from suicide. Our Senate has a very strong immigration and refugee task force. That was one of the meetings I was at last night and today. Um, we have since January of 2024 been walking alongside the Sakai family who came from Venezuela. In 2023, 6 or 7 of us went down to El Paso to see what was going on at the border. We met with Border Servant Corps, this organization that had been invited by FEMA to apply for a huge grant to walk alongside folks who were coming, who were legally prepared to cross the border, not folks who snuck in, families and children who had already been processed and needed some help. Border Serving Corps would receive them. They would give them some lodging, food, new clothes, a time to just rest. Kids could play, and then they found a way to contact whomever needed to be contacted so that those folks would have some next steps prepared for them. They go to the airports with them or take them to the bus station. We got a call in right before Christmas that said, hey, we have a family of 5 who wants to come to Detroit. Can you help? I made one phone call to one of our Detroit churches. Love Rising had a retreat center that had been devastated in 2021 when the east side was flooded through in the summer. Nothing was in that retreat center. Pastor Johnson said, sure, we'll figure it out. And we were able, with the help of folks throughout our Senate, put furniture, clothes, beds, food for this family. And s- from January the 1st, we started working. On January 7th, they arrived. And they are doing very well, and we're still walking alongside them as they continue to go through the processes of seeking status here in the United States. Michigan United is a local community organizer that a lot of us in our Senate are a part of, and they also have been taking, they do a lot of work around immigration and refugee services. Our anti racism team, BRIC, Building Racial Reconciliation in Christ's Kingdom. We meet monthly. Some members just came back from a civil rights tour in the South. They were gone for a week, came back on Saturday. We are very intentional about not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. And out of that group, we also do Bridge Builders Camp at Stony Lake in Living Waters Ministry, where we teach young people, this is what racism looks like, so that they can name it when they see it or feel it or experience it, so that they can be allies for their own generation and accompany someone who's been treated badly. In healthcare, another organizing group, Moses, is addressing some of the health disparities by bringing people to the table to discuss it. Their goal is to have a ballot issue on the ballot in 2026. So they're bringing folks to the table now to talk about the disparities around healthcare. Insurance coverages and insurance rates. I can't tell you the number of churches that insurance has been dropped after they filed a claim. And who do we all have? Church Mutual. So it's not about being in the business of supporting the church, it's about being in the business of insurance. And it's a problem. So we're calling Church Mutual to come and tell us why they keep dropping our policies after we pay our insurance premiums on a regular basis. Christian nationalism is also a topic that has been lifted up a lot lately. And Pastor Matthew Bodie will be, he and I can't think of her name, a rabbi, a young woman, will be talking about Christian nationalism from the Jewish and Lutheran perspective at our Justice Summit coming up in a couple of weeks. And we also have a new social statement on Christian nationalism that was voted in at more recent, in August churchwide assembly. So it may not be published yet, but have a copy and I can send it to you. So what can you do? Most of all, stay informed. One of the most detailed documents I think you should read is Project 2025. It's it the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights calls it a wish list of right-wing policies reflecting on extreme white Christian nationalist ideology. It was written by the Heritage Foundation and more than 100 other conservative groups as a blueprint for a potential conservative administration. And we have seen what has happened over the course of the last 8 9 months. They say it's an effort to further empower the presidency, embed ideal ideas of nonpartisan civil service, and enable the executive branch to unravel the civil rights movement's gains over the last 7 decades. What can you do? Share what you know. Organize, organize, organize. I can't say that enough. Let your money do the talking. Do your research. Who owns the products that you use, and what are the causes that those entities support? When Target said at the beginning of the year that they were going to stop DEI initiatives, the church said, don't shop at Target. Black folks stayed away from Target. And Target has now had a CEO that has resigned and they are closing stores. Our economic impact means something. The accountability becomes dollars and cents to those businesses. Support those who support the issues that you care about at the voting polls. Now, I know Judy was talking about the two parties, the two major parties, and I often find myself at that crossroads where I'm with that libertarian, but I know that's like a vote for the party that I don't support. What do you do? It's so hard to figure out a pathway of protecting what I care about the most. But for me, the problem is we can't wait till the year of the election to do that. Those folks need to start lifting their voices up now, 2 or 3 years before a major election, so that we feel more comfortable about organizing and having folks who know that we are going in a certain direction. But that's just not how the game is played, and we get played. Build your own networks. Who are your partners here in this place? We don't all know everything, but somebody knows what you don't know. Someone knows who you don't know. So build those networks and find the allies who support what you support. And register for our third annual Justice Summit, where you will hear about some of these issues like disability ministries, what it looks like to be welcoming to a disabled person, becoming a queer confirming congregation, talking about suicide, long bridging, having those difficult conversations around building unity, harm reduction workshop for substance abuse, of course, immigration and refugees, and justice and peace for Palestine and Israel. And follow and subscribe to the ELCA Action Advocacy Network so that when they are looking for support for an advocacy piece, you will get that email. And it's very simple. You sign a document, put your name and address, and the letter's already written for you. Read the social statements, of course, and be more engaged. So, I think, more importantly, vote for the greater good. We've talked about that a couple of times. It's just not about me. One of my earlier colleagues, Horacio Vargas, told me once, and he and I were talking. He was like, I've been reading stuff about the Republican Party. Think that's me? And he was like, no, it's not. I was like, but they said that. And he was like, right. On paper, I'm a Republican, but I can't vote for me and leave my people behind. And that he probably said that to me 30 years ago. That's how I live my life. I can't vote for me and leave my people behind. So vote for all of us, the least of these, even if it's painful, because that's what God would have us to do. Justice Summit, and thank you.
Questions, comments for Robin that you'd like to raise?
Maybe this only applies to Lisa and I, but can we get your slides? And that applies to the last.
Yes,
year
I
as
will
well.
send them to
Yeah.
Judy.
Okay, but
Oh, well, you,
can we get your
he
slides?
has them.
Can we get your slides?
They're right here. Yep, okay.
So I loved everything, and I loved the the extent to which the Lutheran Church is out there on social issues.
Mhm.
The one that I've become worried about increasingly, and it doesn't fit neatly in anything,
Mhm.
is rule of law. Because it sounds like a completely secular issue, but without rule of law, there is no separation of church and state. Without rule of law, immigration laws don't matter. And I'm just curious if the Lutheran Church is moving in the direction. Sorry.
I'm stuck too. I really am. I have struggled this year with what is my, I know what I've traditionally done. I'm stuck. I've talked to the bishop about it. I'm not sure what's coming next. We have a new presiding bishop who will be installed the same day as our Justice Summit. Um, but maybe through a new lens with a different perspective, we will be more defined in how we as the ELCA move forward with all of the things that are going on now. But yeah, the struggle is real.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
As we sit here and think of the comments of both Judy and you, Robin, 238 years ago this day, September 17th or 17th, 1787, a group of gentlemen in Philadelphia signed and put into effect the United States Constitution. Today is
How
Constitution
about
Day.
that?
Thank you for your words. We have to protect it. We have to protect the rule of law. We have to protect the Bill of Rights, the 27 amendments attached to the United States Constitution. That is our foundation, and that's our responsibility as Christians through our biblical obligations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just stand here. So my question for Robin is, are there other congregations that have groups like ours that you know of?
As a matter of fact, there is.
All right.
So, um, King of Kings in Shelby Township. Oh my God, time just, yeah, where Dave Parker is. They have started something similar. They did a series, I'm going to say it was last year, but it feels like it could have been this year. They've started a series of conversations and workshops similar to this. They are just speaking about what is, good turnout. They've had book studies, they've had a panel discussion that I was a part of. Um, and I remember this one woman said she was about my age, and she said, I just didn't know. I've been living in my bubble. And I was like, okay, so now you know, and you can't use that as an excuse anymore. Once the bubble is burst, then you have to move accordingly. So that's one congregation in particular because they've done some things very recently. Um, I mentioned Pastor Matthew Bodie because he's so progressive, but Zion and Ferndale is a church that he pastors, and there are a lot of activities in and out of that congregation. So there's two, and I can think about a few more.
Well, I'm asking you and maybe the group behind us too, is one of the things that we almost so much struggled with, make sure we understood was there are people in our congregation who are not very excited. I don't want to say excited, who are not
not on the same page.
Yeah, and just how we tread carefully, but I was wondering about you and if some of the other ladies here have that same problem.
So I mentioned to Judy yesterday when we were, that was yesterday, right? So there's an organizing group called Moses. Moses has been working with congregations in Livonia, and that long bridging, that was very intentional about training pastors to have difficult conversations with members of their congregations. Then the pastors would identify people not, on the far left or the far right, but those in the middle. Some people you cannot change their minds about how they feel. Some folks, I mean, you hear people who say, I voted this way and I wish I hadn't. Those are the people who can be influenced. I hate to use that word, but those are the people who might see things a little bit differently based on what we know, what the scripture is telling us, how we want to move forward. And so these long bridging conversations is actually a training process that includes pastor and lay leaders to come together and have some of those difficult conversations. Um, Livonia congregations are going through the process right now, and it may be something that you want to find out more about. And I can either connect you to the dean, Pastor Sarah Freudenberg, or with a representative from Moses could possibly come and talk to y'all about that too.
I'd just like to thank you both for great presentations tonight and the three from last week. And I am struggling. There is no doubt. I was particularly moved by Pastor Andrea's slide that showed the population during Jesus's time. The upper, the vast, and then the 8% is the number I think you used. The they, the them, the those. And then we've had discussion, and rightfully so, we have turned our attention toward helping, uplifting the they, the them, and the those. And I want to echo your your entreaty to read Project 2025 because we should and will take efforts to support the less privileged. But I want to submit that we need to protect ourselves so that we can continue to help those below, but really challenge everything above. If you listen to our Attorney General today or our FBI Director the last couple of days, or our President the night that the person was killed, we are not, in my humble opinion, we are not approaching an autocracy. We are in one. And I don't know what to do. My grandson flies up and down at least twice a week the strait between Japan, Russia, and China. In the last 2 weeks, our military has executed orders that by every definition are illegal. That speaks volumes to me when our commanders don't call out illegal orders. And I know that's personal, and I apologize. But we can't, or we shouldn't, my humble opinion, do anything except challenge above. And I would ask ask us to think about that. I'm sorry.
Mhm. Can I respond to this for a second, Bill? So, yeah, I think a lot of the rhetoric now, what we're hearing from the White House, is designed to frighten us and intimidate us. And we have to be aware of that. So I was feeling very much like you're feeling. And then I guess it was Monday night. We always watch Rachel Maddow, and I encourage everyone to find her podcast because she's fearless, and she pointed out rightly that they are acting as if they're in total control, but they're not. They're not totally in control. To say that you're going to do something is a completely different thing from doing it. And what they're counting on is people to be afraid, to be quiet, to back off. It's intimidation. Yeah,
Be overwhelmed and
right.
not act.
Exactly. So there are, although it sometimes seems like there's no um, boundaries that they won't cross, there are still judges that every day are standing up to this administration. They are still losing in court. They are meeting resistance from governors and from local officials, and they want to make it seem like they have total power, but they in fact don't have total power. So we have to really be careful not to get swept away with the kind of terror that they're spewing in their public statements.
As Judy said, we have to find the voices that speak to us so that we can be encouraged about what our next steps could be because it is overwhelming and you do get tired and immobilized from so much craziness going on. So you have to find your support network to work through it. You know, we can't do it by ourselves, but we can do it together.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, Robin and Judy. And I am looking for hope in this room because we are raising our voices and are not being silent. We are just getting organized now as the intimidation is ramping up. And I'm looking around this room and I don't think that we are going to stay silent. We're not going to be silenced. So thank you for encouraging us tonight, Robin.
Call me, I'll show up.
I think we've said enough to be at a good concluding point here. So thank you all for being here tonight. And remember, next week we do have Attorney Jack Konarek of the Michigan Immigrant Rights Center. We'll be talking about more specific focuses on immigration, legal issues, and those kinds of things. So hope to see you again.